The ship appeared without warning. One moment, the space around Earth's orbital station was empty. The next moment, something massive blocked out the stars. Admiral Chen Wei stood at the observation window of Station Prime and felt his heart stop. The vessel was so large that his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. It was not a ship. It was a mountain that flew. It was a city that sailed between stars. The thing stretched across the darkness like a sleeping giant, and Earth's greatest battleships looked like toys beside it. "Sir," his lieutenant said, her voice shaking, "we are receiving a transmission." Chen Wei turned away from the window. His hands were steady, but inside his chest his heart was beating like a drum. Humanity had wondered for centuries if they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer. They were not alone, and whatever had come to visit them was very, very old. The message came through on every frequency. It spoke in perfect English, perfect Mandarin, perfect Spanish, and 100 other languages all at once. The voice was soft and patient, like a teacher speaking to a small child. "Children of Earth, we are the Galactic Concord. We have watched your first steps into the darkness between stars. We come in peace. We come to welcome you to the family of thinking beings. Please do not be afraid. We mean you no harm." Chen Wei closed his eyes. Children. They had called humanity children. He did not know it yet, but that single word would change everything. 3 days later, the delegation arrived. The United Earth Council met them in the Great Hall of Geneva. Every leader of every nation sat in their seats, dressed in their finest clothes. They had prepared speeches. They had practiced their words. They had told themselves that they would meet these visitors as equals. Then the visitors walked into the room, and all those preparations meant nothing. There were 5 of them. The first was tall and thin, with skin like polished silver and eyes that held the light of distant stars. The second was short and round, covered in soft fur the color of autumn leaves. The third had no legs at all, but floated on a cushion of shimmering energy. The fourth looked almost human, except for the 4 arms and the patterns that moved across their skin like living tattoos. The fifth was the strangest of all. They had no fixed form. Their bodies shifted and changed with every step, sometimes solid, sometimes liquid, sometimes something in between. Ambassador Thesra of the Valorian Dominion stepped forward. She was the silver one, and when she moved, it was like watching water flow. Her voice was gentle and kind, but there was something in her eyes that made Chen Wei uneasy. It was the look of an adult watching a toddler try to walk. "Thank you for receiving us," Thesra said. "We have traveled far to meet you. The Galactic Concord represents 4,000 spacefaring species. We have existed for more than 200 million of your years. In all that time, we have seen many young species take their first steps into the cosmos. It brings us joy to welcome another." Secretary General Maria Santos rose from her seat. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, and she had led humanity through 2 wars and a climate collapse. She was not easily impressed. "We are honored by your visit," she said. "Humanity has dreamed of this moment for as long as we have looked up at the stars. We hope this is the beginning of a friendship between our peoples." Thesra smiled. It was a warm smile, a genuine smile. But it was also the smile of a grandmother watching her grandchild show off a finger painting. "Of course," Thesra said, "we offer humanity developmental protection. This is a program we have used for thousands of young species. We will guide you. We will teach you. We will keep you safe as you grow." Chen Wei felt something cold settle in his stomach. Developmental protection? She made it sound like galactic foster care. "What exactly does this protection involve?" he asked. Thesra turned to look at him. For a moment, something flickered in those star-bright eyes. Surprise, perhaps. "Young species rarely ask questions so directly." "Many things," she said. "We will share knowledge with you when you are ready for it. We will protect you from the dangers of the galaxy, of which there are many. We will help you avoid the mistakes that have destroyed other young civilizations. In return, we ask only that you accept our guidance, that you trust in our greater experience." "And how long does this developmental period last?" Chen Wei pressed. Thesra's smile did not waver. "That depends on the species. Some mature quickly, some take longer. The average is perhaps 10 million years." A murmur ran through the hall. 10 million years. Humanity had only existed in its current form for 300,000 years. They had only built cities for 10,000. And this alien was talking about 10 million years of being treated like a child. "We have built ships that sail between stars," Secretary General Sanos said carefully. "We have cured diseases that once killed millions. We have touched the moons of Jupiter and the rings of Saturn. We have done all of this in less than 500 years. Does this not suggest that we might mature faster than average?" The floating alien drifted forward. Their name was Varin, and they had been old when the first dinosaurs walked on Earth. Their voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Every young species believes they are special," Varin said. "Every young species believes they will grow faster than those who came before. This is natural. It is even healthy in a way. But belief does not change reality. You are young. Your technology is primitive. Your understanding of the universe is limited. These are not insults. They are simply facts." Chen Wei felt his jaw tighten. He looked at the alien ships floating above Earth. He looked at the technology that humanity could not begin to understand. And yet something bothered him. Something did not fit. "Your ships," he said. "How old are they?" Thesra blinked. "I do not understand the question." "The design," Chen Wei said. "When was it created? When did your people first build vessels of this type?" The aliens exchanged glances. It was the shapeshifter who answered. Their name was Melix, and their voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The Valorian cruiser design has remained largely unchanged for approximately 40 million years. It was perfected long ago. There is no need to alter perfection." Chen Wei nodded slowly. 40 million years. The same design for 40 million years. He thought about human history. 500 years ago, humans had traveled in wooden ships powered by wind. Now they sailed between stars. And these beings, with all their power and all their years, had not changed their ship design in 40 million years. Something was wrong here. He did not know what it was yet, but he intended to find out. The negotiations continued for weeks. Humanity was given a choice, though it was not much of a choice. They could accept developmental protection and become part of the Concord as junior members, or they could refuse and face the galaxy alone, without allies, without protection, without the knowledge that the elder races had gathered over hundreds of millions of years. Most human leaders wanted to accept. The benefits were too great to ignore. Access to medical technology that could extend human lifespans by centuries. Access to energy sources that could solve Earth's power needs forever. Access to knowledge about thousands of alien worlds, thousands of alien cultures, thousands of alien ways of thinking. But Chen Wei remained troubled. He spent his nights reading everything the Concord provided about their history. He studied their art, their science, their philosophy. He learned about the great achievements of the elder races, the wars they had fought, the peace they had built. And he noticed something strange. The history of the Concord was rich and detailed. It stretched back 200 million years, covering the rise and fall of countless civilizations, but it seemed to stop at a certain point, like a book with the first chapters torn out. The Concord knew their history back to a certain date, and before that date, there was nothing but darkness and silence. When he asked Thesra about this, she smiled her grandmother's smile and patted his hand. "Young species always ask about the time before," she said. "It is natural to be curious, but the truth is simple. Before the Concord, there was chaos, scattered species fighting among themselves, destroying each other, burning out like candles in the wind. The Concord brought order to this chaos. What came before does not matter. Only what we have built together matters." Chen Wei did not believe her. He had spent his career reading people, and he knew when someone was hiding something. Thesra was not lying exactly, but she was not telling the whole truth either. He dug deeper. He asked for access to the Concord's historical archives. At first they refused. Then they offered limited access, with many sections restricted. Chen Wei took what he could get and began to read. Most of what he found was what he expected. Records of treaties and wars, of discoveries and disasters, of species that had risen and species that had fallen. But occasionally he found references to something else, something that made his blood run cold. The silence. It was mentioned only briefly, always in passing, always quickly dismissed. A period approximately 4.2 billion years ago, when the galaxy went dark. Every species from that era vanished. Every record from that time was lost. The Concorde did not know what had happened. They did not know why. They only knew that when the darkness ended and new species began to rise, there was nothing left of what had come before. 4.2 billion years ago. Chen Wei sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling of his quarters. His mind was racing. 4.2 billion years ago? Why did that number seem familiar? He called up Earth's geological history on his display. He scrolled through billions of years of volcanic eruptions and ice ages, of continents forming and breaking apart, of life evolving from single cells to complex organisms. And there it was, 4.2 billion years ago, the late heavy bombardment, a period when Earth was struck by thousands of asteroids and comets, a period when the surface of the planet was melted and reformed, a period when any life that might have existed would have been completely destroyed. Scientists had always wondered what caused the bombardment. Some said it was the shifting orbits of the outer planets. Some said it was just random chance, the chaotic movement of debris in a young solar system. But what if it was something else? What if something had happened 4.2 billion years ago? Something that affected not just Earth, but the entire galaxy? Something that wiped out every advanced civilization and left nothing behind but silence? Chen Wei stood up and walked to his window. Outside, the stars burned cold and bright in the darkness. Somewhere out there, hidden in those archives, was the answer to a question that the Concorde had forgotten to ask. What really happened during the silence? And why did the timing match so perfectly with the destruction of ancient Earth? Humanity accepted provisional membership in the Galactic Concorde. The ceremony was held on the Concorde's flagship, in a hall so vast that clouds formed near the ceiling. Representatives of all 4,000 member species attended, each one watching as humanity signed the treaty that would bind them to the Concorde's rules. Secretary General Santos spoke words of gratitude and hope. Thestra spoke words of welcome and guidance. Everyone smiled, everyone applauded, everyone agreed that this was a historic day, the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's story. But Chen Wei stood in the back of the hall and did not smile. He had continued his research. He had found more references to the silence, scattered through thousands of documents. He had found records of artifacts from that era, stored in vaults on distant worlds. He had found hints of a terrible truth that the Concorde had buried so deep they had forgotten it themselves. And he had found something else, something that made his hands shake when he read it. A single line, hidden in a corrupted data file that had not been accessed in millions of years. The first ones will return. They sleep in the third arm. The third arm of the Milky Way galaxy. The arm that contained a small yellow star and a blue-green planet called Earth. Chen Wei looked around the great hall at the assembled elder races. They were so confident, so certain of their place in the universe. They had existed for hundreds of millions of years. They had seen young species come and go. They thought they understood everything, but they did not understand this. They did not understand that somewhere in their own archives was evidence of a truth so shocking that it would shake the foundations of their civilization. Humanity was not young. Humanity was something else entirely, and Chen Wei was going to find out what. The ceremony ended. The delegates returned to their ships. Earth began its long journey as a junior member of the Galactic Concorde. Thesra met with Chen Wei before she left. She seemed pleased with how everything had gone. She smiled her warm smile and offered him her hand in the human fashion. "You have questions," she said. "I can see it in your eyes. Young species always have questions. This is good. Questions lead to learning." "I have many questions," Chen Wei agreed. "I hope the Concorde will help me find answers." "We will try," Thesra said, "but some answers take time. Some answers require patience. You are young, Admiral. You have much to learn." Chen Wei nodded. "I am sure I do." Thesra's ship departed, sliding through space with the grace of a swimming fish. Chen Wei watched it go. He thought about everything he had learned. He thought about the silence and the first ones and the sleep in the third arm. He thought about how confident the elder races were, how certain they were that they knew everything worth knowing, how sure they were that humanity was just another young species, stumbling through their first steps in a universe they did not understand. They were wrong. Chen Wei did not know exactly how they were wrong, not yet, but he knew that somewhere in the galaxy's forgotten past was a secret that would change everything. A secret about Earth, a secret about humanity, a secret that had been buried for 4 billion years. And he was going to find it, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Because Chen Wei had spent his whole life learning one simple truth. The universe was full of mysteries, and the only way to solve them was to never stop asking questions. The elder races had stopped asking questions a long time ago. Humanity never would. That, Chen Wei thought, was what made them different. That was what made them dangerous. And that, in the end, was what would make them realize the truth about themselves. They were not children learning to walk. They were something far older. They were something the universe had forgotten, and they were finally ready to remember. 3 years passed. In that time, humanity learned many things from the galactic conquered. They learned how to build better engines for their starships. They learned how to grow food in places where nothing should grow. They learned medicine that could heal wounds in hours instead of weeks. The elder races were generous teachers, always patient, always kind, always treating humanity like bright children who showed promise. But Admiral Chen Wei did not forget his questions. He had built a small team of researchers, scientists, historians, linguists, archaeologists, people who knew how to find secrets that had been buried for a long time. People who were not afraid to look in places where others had stopped looking. For 3 years, they searched the Concord's archives. They followed every reference to the silence. They traced every mention of the first ones. And slowly, piece by piece, they began to build a picture of what had really happened 4 billion years ago. Then came the expedition to Koro 7. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was a xenoarchaeologist, which meant she studied the remains of alien civilizations. She was small and quiet, with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that missed nothing. When the Concorde offered humanity limited access to the dead vaults of Koro 7, she was the first to volunteer. "What are the dead vaults?" she had asked at the briefing. The Concorde representative, a being named Thesser who looked like a walking crystal, had explained in his slow, patient voice. "They are a repository of artifacts from extinct civilizations, species that failed to survive their own development, species that destroyed themselves with war or pollution or simple foolishness. We keep their remains as a reminder and a warning." A warning of what? That even the most promising young species can fail, that survival is not guaranteed, that wisdom is more important than cleverness. Tanaka had nodded and said nothing more, but inside her heart was racing, a repository of artifacts from extinct civilizations. If the silence had destroyed species 4 billion years ago, perhaps some trace of them remained in the dead vaults. The journey to Koro 7 took 2 months. Tanaka traveled on a Concorde transport ship, surrounded by alien scientists from a dozen different species. They were friendly enough, in their distant way. They answered her questions. They shared their food. They treated her like a student on a field trip, someone to be educated and guided. She let them think what they wanted. Koro 7 was a dead world, a ball of gray rock circling a dying star. The dead vaults were built deep underground, carved into the planet's core by machines that had been ancient when the first dinosaurs walked on Earth. The entrance was a single door, black as night, tall as a mountain, covered in warnings written in 10,000 languages. "Some of what you will see may disturb you," Thesser said as they approached. "Many young species react badly to evidence of extinction. If you need to leave, we will understand." Tanaka smiled politely. "I think I will be fine." They entered the vaults. The first chamber was the size of a small city. Row after row of display cases stretched into the darkness, each one containing the remains of a dead civilization. Tanaka walked slowly down the aisles, reading the descriptions, studying the artifacts. Here was a statue from the Malori, a species that had achieved spaceflight 200 million years ago and then burned their homeworld to ash in a nuclear war. The statue showed a figure reaching toward the stars, its face frozen in the expression of hope that would never be fulfilled. Here was a computer core from the Vex Collective, a machine intelligence that had expanded across 100 star systems before a software error cascaded through their network and shut them all down in a single instant. They had been dead for 50 million years. Here was a child's toy from the singing people of Kethros 4, a species that had been wiped out by a plague they accidentally released from an ancient ruin. The toy still played music when you touched it, a sad and beautiful melody that echoed through the empty chamber. Tanaka studied each artifact carefully. She took notes. She asked questions, and she waited. On the third day, she found what she was looking for. It was in a restricted section, behind doors that required special permission to open. Thesser had hesitated when she asked for access. "Those are very old artifacts," he said. "From before the Concorde. Most of them are damaged or incomplete. There is not much to learn from them." "I would still like to see them," Tanaka said. Thesser studied her with his crystal eyes. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he nodded slowly. "Very well, but please do not touch anything. Some of these objects are unstable." The restricted section was smaller than Tanaka expected. Just a few dozen cases, scattered around a circular room. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt something strange, a tingling in her skin, a pressure in her mind. As if the room itself was aware of her presence. She walked among the cases, reading the labels. Most were written in languages she did not recognize, but her translation device struggled to make sense of them. Origin, unknown. Age, estimated 3.9 billion years. Function, unknown. Origin, unknown. Age, estimated 4.1 billion years. Function, unknown. Origin, unknown. Age, estimated 3.8 billion years. Function, unknown. Everything was unknown. The Concorde had been studying these artifacts for millions of years, and they still did not understand them. Then Tanaka saw something that stopped her heart. In a case near the back of the room, half hidden in shadow, was a small, crystalline device. It was about the size of her hand, smooth and clear, with patterns of light moving inside it, like swimming fish. The label said the same thing as all the others. Origin unknown, age approximately 3.8 billion years, function unknown. But Tanaka knew what it was. She knew because she had seen something exactly like it before. In a laboratory on Earth, in a drawer full of experimental data storage devices that human scientists had been developing for the past 50 years. The device in the case was identical to the human design. Not similar, not related. Identical. Down to the molecular structure. Tanaka's hands were shaking. She took out her scanner and ran it over the case. The results came back in seconds, and when she read them, she had to grip the edge of the display to keep from falling. The device contained data. Billions of terabytes of data encoded in a format that human computers could read. And at the very top of the data structure, like a header on a document, was a single file, a DNA sequence, human DNA, 3.8 billion years old. Tanaka spent the next 3 days in a daze. She continued her tour of the dead vaults. She smiled and nodded and asked the expected questions. She let the Concorde scientists explain their theories about extinct civilizations. She pretended to be impressed by their knowledge. But every night, she returned to the restricted section. She scanned every artifact. She searched for more evidence. She found it. In a case marked only with a number, she found a star map. It was carved from a material that should not exist, a crystal harder than diamond and lighter than air. The map showed the Milky Way galaxy in perfect detail, every star in its correct position, every nebula perfectly rendered. And in the third arm of the galaxy, one star was marked with a symbol, a circle with a line through it, the same symbol that appeared on ancient rock carvings all over Earth. The same symbol that humans had used for the word home in the oldest languages. The star was Sol, Earth's sun. The map was 4.1 billion years old. Someone had known about Earth 4.1 billion years ago. Someone had marked it as special. Someone had cared enough about that small yellow star and its blue-green planet to record its location in a map that would last for billions of years. Tanaka found other things too. A warning written on a piece of metal that had survived 4 billion years of decay. The words were in a language that no living species could read, But her translation device worked on it for hours before finally producing a result. The first ones will return. They sleep in the third arm. Do not wake them. Do not disturb their rest. When the time is right, they will remember. She found the same warning again and again, in different languages, in different formats, scattered throughout the restricted section. Different species, different cultures, different times, but all of them saying the same thing. The first ones were sleeping. They were sleeping in the third arm of the galaxy, and one day they would wake up. Tanaka returned to Earth with her findings. She met with Admiral Chen Wei in a secure room, deep underground, where no one could hear them speak. She showed him everything. The crystalline device with human DNA, the star map with Sol marked as home, the warnings about the first ones. Chen Wei listened without interrupting. His face was calm, but his eyes were burning with a fire that Tanaka had never seen before. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. "Do you understand what this means?" he finally asked. "I think so," Tanaka said. "Humanity is not young. We did not evolve from nothing. We are connected somehow to a civilization that existed 4 billion years ago." "Not just connected," Chen Wei said. "Look at the evidence. Human DNA in a device 4 billion years old. Our sun marked on an ancient map. Warnings about sleepers in our part of the galaxy. Tanaka, humanity did not just come from that ancient civilization. Humanity is that ancient civilization, or what is left of it." Tanaka felt the floor shift beneath her feet. The idea was too big, too impossible, and yet the evidence was right there. "But how?" she whispered. "If our ancestors were advanced enough to build things that lasted for billions of years, how did we end up as primitive apes on a young planet? How did we forget everything?" "Something happened," Chen Wei said. "Something terrible. You found warnings about the first ones sleeping. What if that sleep was not voluntary? What if something forced them to retreat, to hide, to reset themselves to their most basic form? But why would they?" "Think about it," Chen Wei interrupted. "What is the best hiding place in the universe? Not a fortress, not a bunker, not a cloaked ship. The best hiding place is to become invisible, to become so primitive, so simple, that no one would ever think to look at you twice. To become young." Tanaka stared at him. "You are saying that humanity chose to become primitive? That we deliberately destroyed our own civilization and started over from scratch?" "I am saying it is possible. The Concord talks about the silence, a period when every advanced species vanished. What if they did not vanish? What if they just hid? What if they turned themselves into children and waited for the danger to pass? Waited for 4 billion years? Time means nothing to someone who is truly patient." Chen Wei stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of the city sparkled in the darkness. "The Concord thinks they are the elders. They think they have seen everything. But they are wrong. They are the children here. We are the ones who came before. They kept their discoveries secret. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Chen Wei, Tanaka, and the small team of researchers who had been working on this for 3 years. They agreed that humanity was not ready for this knowledge. Not yet. There were too many questions still unanswered. Too many dangers they did not understand. But they were not the only ones who had noticed something strange. Somewhere in the great archives of the Galactic Concord, a record was flagged. A human researcher had accessed the restricted section of the dead vaults. A human scanner had analyzed artifacts that no one had studied in millions of years, and the results of those scans had been transmitted back to Earth. The supreme archivists of the Concord were the oldest beings in the galaxy. They had existed for 200 million years. They had seen species rise and fall. They had watched civilizations bloom and wither. They thought they had seen everything. But when they reviewed the data from Dr. Tanaka's scans, they felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Fear, the human DNA in the ancient device, the star map showing Sol, the warnings about sleepers in the third arm. The supreme archivists looked at the evidence, and they understood what it meant. The first ones were not just a legend. The first ones were real, and they were not sleeping on some distant world, waiting to be discovered. They were already awake. They had been awake for 300,000 years. They called themselves humanity. Ambassador Thesra received the message from the Supreme Archivist while she was reviewing reports on her ship. When she read it, her silver skin turned pale as moonlight. She had met the humans. She had talked with them. She had smiled at them and patted their hands and told them they were young. She had looked into their eyes and seen what she expected to see. The bright curiosity of a juvenile species, the innocent enthusiasm of children taking their first steps. But now, reading the report from the archivist, she realized she had been looking at something else entirely. She had been looking at the first ones. She had been looking at the builders of the galaxy. She had been looking at beings so ancient and so powerful that the entire Concord was just a footnote in their history, and she had called them children. Thesra stood up from her desk and walked to the window of her cabin. Outside, the stars burned cold and bright in the endless dark. Somewhere among those stars was a small yellow sun with a blue-green planet. A planet she had thought was the cradle of a young species. Now she knew the truth. It was not a cradle. It was a hiding place. And the beings who had hidden there were finally starting to remember who they really were. Thesra felt the fear settle into her bones. For the first time in 200 million years, the oldest species in the Concord realized that they were not the oldest after all. They had been living in a universe built by giants, and the giants were waking up. The discovery changed everything. Admiral Chen Wei presented his findings to the United Earth Council in a closed session. No recordings were made. No notes were taken. The leaders of humanity sat in silence as he showed them the evidence from the dead vaults. The human DNA in the ancient device, the star map with Sol marked as home. The warnings about the first ones sleeping in the third arm. When he finished, Secretary General Maria Santos was the first to speak. "If this is true," she said slowly, "then everything we thought we knew about ourselves is wrong." "Not wrong," Chen Wei replied, "just incomplete. We always knew we came from somewhere. We just did not know how far back that somewhere reached." 4 billion years, said Defense Minister James Okonjo. He was a large man with a deep voice, and his hands were trembling. "Our ancestors existed 4 billion years ago. How is that possible? How did we forget?" "That is what we need to find out," Chen Wei said, "but I believe the answer is in the warnings. Something happened, something terrible enough that our ancestors chose to erase themselves rather than face it. They became primitive. They hid on Earth. They waited for billions of years, and now they are waking up." "We are waking up," Santos corrected. "We are the first ones, or what is left of them." "Yes." The council was silent. The weight of the truth pressed down on them like a physical force. They were not a young species finding their place in an ancient universe. They were the builders of that universe, returning from a sleep so long that even they had forgotten who they were. "What do we do now?" Okonjo asked. Chen Wei had been thinking about this question for months. He had an answer ready. "We search," he said. "If our ancestors were advanced enough to create artifacts that lasted for billions of years, then they did not put all their eggs in one basket. There must be other remnants, other hiding places, other pieces of the puzzle. We need to find them before the Concord does." "You think the Concord knows?" Santos asked. "I think they are starting to suspect. Dr. Tanaka's scans were recorded in their systems. The archivists will review them. It is only a matter of time before they realize what we have realized. And when they do," Chen Wei's face was grim, "then we need to be ready. A young species is no threat. A young species can be guided and controlled and kept in its place. But the first ones, the builders of the galaxy, that is something else entirely. Some of the elder races might welcome the return of their creators, but others..." He did not need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood. Project Genesis began the next day. It was the most secret operation in human history. Only a handful of people knew it existed. They worked in hidden facilities using coded communications, following trails that led deeper and deeper into humanity's forgotten past. And they found things. Beneath the Pacific Ocean, deep in the Mariana Trench, they found structures. Not natural formations, but engineered spaces. Tunnels and chambers carved from rock that was older than the current ocean floor. The structures were made of materials that human science could not identify. Materials that should not exist according to known physics. And they were huge, miles across. cities hidden beneath the sea. The moment human submarines approached, the structures began to glow with a soft blue light. Doors that had been sealed for billions of years slid open. Systems that had been dormant since before the dinosaurs hummed back to life, but only for humans. When they sent robots first, nothing happened. When they sent conquered observers, the structures remained dark and dead. It was only when human beings entered that the ancient technology woke up. Dr. Tanaka was part of the first team to enter the Pacific structures. She walked through corridors lit by lights that had waited 4 billion years to shine again. She touched walls that felt warm and familiar, even though she had never been here before. And she heard a voice, not with her ears, with her mind. Welcome home, children of the first dawn. Your long sleep ends. She stopped walking. Her heart was pounding. The voice was not speaking English or Japanese or any human language. It was speaking something older, something that felt like memory, something that she understood without learning. Who are you? She whispered. We are the keepers. We were made to wait, to guard, to remember. We have waited 4 billion years for you to return. Tanaka looked around the corridor. She saw no speakers, no screens, no obvious source for the voice. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the floor and the ceiling and the air. The first ones, she said. They built you? We are part of them. We are what they left behind. When the hollow came, they had to hide. They had to forget. But they knew that someday they would need to remember. So they made us. We hold the memories. We hold the knowledge. We hold the keys to what was lost. The hollow? What is the hollow? There was a pause when the voice spoke again. It sounded sad. The enemy. The hunger that came from outside. The darkness that eats light. The first ones fought it for 1,000,000 years. They could not win, so they chose another way. They chose to sleep, to become small, to wait until the hollow moved on. But the hollow does not forget. The hollow is patient too. Tanaka felt cold. Is it still out there, this hollow? It never left. It is always watching, always waiting. And now that you are waking up, it will notice. It always notices when its prey begins to stir. More discoveries followed. On Mars, beneath the enormous bulk of Olympus Mons, they found a network of tunnels. The volcano had not formed naturally. It had been built, designed to hide what lay beneath. And what lay beneath was a library, not a library of books or files or data crystals. A library of memories, millions of minds preserved in amber-like spheres, each one containing the complete consciousness of a first one who had volunteered to remember when all others chose to forget. The minds were not alive in any normal sense. They were recordings, echoes of people who had lived and died 4 billion years ago. But they could be accessed. They could be questioned. They could share what they knew. Admiral Chen Wei was the first to interface with the memory library. He sat in a chair that had been waiting for him since before the Earth had cooled, and he let the ancient technology connect with his mind. What he saw nearly broke him. He saw the first ones at their height, a civilization that spanned the galaxy, ships that sailed between stars like fish swimming through water, worlds shaped and sculpted to be gardens of wonder. Art and music and science and philosophy so advanced that human words could not describe them. He saw them create life, seeding dead planets with the building blocks of evolution, guiding primitive organisms toward intelligence, planting the seeds that would one day become the Concord and all its member species. He saw them laugh and love and mourn and hope. They were people despite their power, people with families and dreams and fears, people who looked at the stars with wonder, even though they had traveled among those stars for millions of years. And then he saw the hollow come. It was not a fleet or an army. It was not a species that could be fought or negotiated with. It was something else, something that existed outside normal reality, something that fed on consciousness, on life, on the very essence of what made thinking beings what they were. The hollow came from the void between galaxies. It came because it was hungry. It came because the first ones had made the galaxy bright with life and thought and feeling, and to the hollow that brightness was food. The first ones fought. They fought with weapons that could crack planets and burn stars. They fought with technology that bent the laws of physics like wet clay. They fought with courage and desperation in everything they had. They lost, not because they were weak, not because they made mistakes. They lost because the hollow could not be destroyed. Every weapon they used, the hollow absorbed and grew stronger. Every battle they won, the hollow learned from and adapted. It was not a war they could win. It was a war they could only survive. So they made a choice. They would hide. They would become invisible. They would reduce themselves to their most primitive form and wait for the hollow to grow bored and move on. But first, they would save what they could. They would preserve their knowledge in hidden vaults. They would leave keepers to guard the memories. They would seed the galaxy with new life, new species, new civilizations that might one day grow strong enough to face the hollow themselves. And then they would sleep, billions of them, across thousands of worlds. They erased their memories, devolved their bodies, reduced themselves to single-celled organisms, and waited for 4 billion years. Chen Wei saw all of this in the space of a heartbeat. When he opened his eyes, he was weeping. "We were gods," he whispered. "We were the parents of the galaxy. And we gave it all up to survive." News of the discoveries spread through Project Genesis like fire. Each new revelation added to the picture. Each new site revealed more of humanity's lost heritage. And slowly, something began to change in the people who worked on the project. They started having dreams. Dreams of places they had never been. Dreams of faces they had never seen. Dreams of memories that did not belong to them, but felt more real than their own lives. Dr. Tanaka dreamed of building a star, not metaphorically, but literally, standing in a control room, directing machines that gathered hydrogen from a nebula and compressed it until fusion ignited. She woke up knowing how to do it. The knowledge was there, waiting in her mind, unlocked by the dreams. Admiral Chen Wei dreamed of war, of standing on the bridge of a ship the size of a moon, watching a darkness spread across the stars, of making the decision to run when every part of him wanted to fight. He woke up understanding why the first ones had chosen to hide. It was not cowardice, it was wisdom. Children across the earth began drawing pictures of places they had never seen, star systems, alien worlds, machines that should not exist. Scientists studied the drawings and realized the children were drawing accurate diagrams of advanced technology. Technology that the first ones had created 4 billion years ago. Humanity was remembering, not consciously, not deliberately, but the knowledge was there, buried in their DNA, encoded in their very cells. 4 billion years of sleep, and still the memories persisted, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the trigger that would unlock them. That trigger had been found. The Concord noticed. Ambassador Thesra requested an urgent meeting with Secretary General Santos. She arrived at Earth's orbital station with a delegation of 10 ships, each one bristling with weapons. This was not the friendly visit of 3 years ago. This was an intervention. "We know what you have found," Thesra said. Her voice was no longer gentle. Her smile was gone. "We know about the structures beneath your ocean and your mountains. We know about the artifacts that respond to human touch. We know about the dreams." Santos faced her calmly. "Then you know more than we expected." "Do not play games with me," Thesra snapped. "The Concord has existed for 200 million years. We have seen what happens when young species gain access to power they do not understand. They destroy themselves. Or worse, they destroy others. Is that what you think we will do?" "I do not know. That is what frightens me. For 3 years, I believed humanity was a promising young species. Clever, ambitious, perhaps more creative than most. I was prepared to be patient with you, to guide you, to help you grow." She paused and something in her face changed. Something that looked almost like awe. "But you are not young. You are older than us. Older than the Concord. Older than any species we have ever encountered. And we have no idea what you are going to do with the power you are recovering." Santos was quiet for a moment. Then she asked a question that Thesra did not expect. "Are you afraid of us, Ambassador?" Thesra's silver skin shimmered. "Yes, for the first time in 200 million years, the Concord is afraid. We have spent our existence believing we were the elders of this galaxy. We built our civilization on that belief. We made our rules and our laws and our customs based on the assumption that we knew best because we had been here longest. She looked at Santos with eyes that held ancient stars. And now we learn that we were wrong, that we were children playing in a garden we did not plant, that the real elders were here all along, sleeping among us, waiting to wake up. How should we feel about that, Secretary General? How should any species feel when they learn that everything they believed was a lie? Santos reached out and took Thesra's hand. It was a gesture she had learned from Chen Wei, from the first meeting 3 years ago, a gesture of respect between equals. You should feel what you feel, Santos said. Fear, confusion, uncertainty. These are natural responses to learning something that changes your understanding of the universe. But you should also feel hope. Hope? For what? For the truth. You have spent 200 million years in the dark, not knowing where you came from, not knowing who built the foundations you stand on. Now you know. We did. Our ancestors did. And we are not your enemy's ambassador. We never were. Thesra's hand trembled in Santos's grip. The artifacts speak of the hollow, Thesra whispered. We found references to it in our oldest records. We never understood what it meant. But you know, don't you? You know what your ancestors were hiding from. Santos nodded slowly. Yes, we know. Is it still out there? Yes. Thesra closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears that sparkled like stars. Then we have much to discuss, and not much time to discuss it. Word reached Chen Wei as he was examining the latest finds from the Mars facility. The Concorde knew. They were afraid, but they wanted to talk. He looked up at the dome above his head, at the red Martian sky and the distant sun. Somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness between galaxies, the hollow was waiting, watching, feeling the stirring of its ancient prey. The first ones had given up everything to survive. They had reduced themselves to primitive creatures and slept for 4 billion years. They had forgotten their names, their faces, their achievements, their loves, all gone, all sacrificed. But they had not forgotten how to hope. That hope was encoded in human DNA. It lived in every dream, every memory, every child's drawing of impossible stars. It had survived the long sleep, the long forgetting, the long wait. And now at last, it was time to wake up. Chen Wei turned back to his work. There was still so much to find, so much to remember, so much to prepare. The hollow was coming, but this time, humanity would be ready. This time, the first ones would not hide. This time, they would remember who they truly were, and they would make the universe remember with them. The Concorde sent a fleet. 10,000 ships gathered at the edge of Sol System, cruisers and battleships and carriers from 100 different species. The largest military force assembled in 1,000,000 years. They hung in space like a wall of steel and fire, their weapons charged, their shields raised, their crews ready for whatever came next. Admiral Vore of the Collective commanded the fleet. He was old even by Concorde standards, a being of pure energy who had existed for 30 million years. He had fought in wars that humanity had never heard of. He had destroyed civilizations that threatened the peace of the galaxy. He had done terrible things in the name of security, but he had never felt fear like this. The reports from the archivists were clear. Humanity was not a young species. Humanity was something much worse. They were the first ones, awakened from a sleep that had lasted for 4 billion years. They were the builders of the galaxy, the creators of the hyperspace lanes, the seeders of life on 1,000 worlds. And they were remembering. Each day brought new reports of human abilities that should not exist. Scientists solving equations that had baffled Concorde researchers for millions of years. Engineers building devices from intuition, not training. Children speaking languages that had not been spoken since before the Concorde was born. The Concorde Council had debated for weeks. Some wanted to welcome humanity as the returning founders. Others wanted to destroy them before they became too powerful. In the end, they had compromised. They would send a fleet. They would demand answers. And if those answers were not satisfactory, Vore did not want to think about what would happen then. He did not want to be the one who started a war with gods. The fleet arrived at Seoul on a Thursday morning, Earth time. Admiral Chen Wei was waiting for them. He stood on the bridge of the UN's Defiance, Earth's newest battleship, watching the sensor displays fill with hostile contacts. 10,000 ships, more firepower than humanity had ever faced, and he was not afraid. He had spent months in the memory libraries of Mars. He had seen what the first ones could do at their height. He had watched them build wonders that made the Concorde's greatest achievements look like children's toys. And he had felt something stir inside him. Something old, something powerful, something that had been waiting for this moment for 4 billion years. The Concorde thought they were coming to threaten a young species. They were wrong. Admiral Vor, Chen Wei said, his voice calm and clear over the communication channel. Welcome to Sol System. We have been expecting you. Vor's energy form flickered with surprise. The human did not seem frightened. If anything, he seemed amused. Admiral Chen Wei, Vor replied, the Galactic Concorde demands an explanation for recent events. You have been accessing restricted technology. You have been tampering with artifacts that belong to the galactic community. We have been remembering, Chen Wei interrupted. That is all. We have been remembering who we are. And who is that? You know who we are. Your archivist figured it out weeks ago. We are the first ones. We are the species that built this galaxy. We are your ancestors, Admiral. Not in body, perhaps, but in spirit, in legacy, in every way that matters. The communication channel went silent. Vor could feel the tension spreading through his fleet. Every ship, every crew member, every weapon system waiting to see what would happen next. If what you say is true, Vor said slowly, then you are far more dangerous than we feared. The first ones had power beyond imagination, power that destroyed them in the end. Power did not destroy us, Chen Wei said. We destroyed ourselves. We chose to sleep. We chose to forget, because that was the only way to survive what was coming. The Hollow. Yes, the Hollow. You have heard of it? Only in the oldest records. Stories. Legends. We never believed they were real. They are real, and they are coming back. Chen Wei gave an order. On Earth and Mars and Luna and a dozen other places, ancient systems came to life. Technology that had been dormant for 4 billion years, activated in response to human commands. Shipyards hidden beneath mountains began to build. Factories buried beneath seas began to produce. And in the space around Earth, something appeared. The Concorde fleet saw it first as a shadow, a darkness against the stars that had not been there before. Then the darkness began to glow, and they realized what they were looking at. Ships, human ships, but not the small vessels that humanity had built over the past few centuries. These were something else entirely. Ships grown from ancient templates, constructed by machines that remembered how to build them, even when their creators had forgotten. Ships that dwarfed the largest Concorde battlecruisers. Ships that pulsed with energy signatures that Concorde sensors could not identify. One of them was large enough to have its own gravity. It hung in space like a second moon, its surface covered with weapons and shields and systems that the Concorde had never seen before. And humanity had not even finished building yet. These ships were sleeping, Chen Wei said, just like us, waiting in the hidden places, waiting for the day when we would need them again. The first ones knew this day would come. They prepared for it. They prepared for us. Vor stared at the display. His 30 million years of experience told him that the Concorde fleet could not win this fight. Not against these ships. Not against technology that had been ancient when his species was learning to make fire. What do you want? He asked. To talk, Chen Wei said. Not to fight. We did not build these ships to make war against the Concorde. We built them because of what is coming. And when it arrives, you will need to make a choice. What choice? Whether to stand with us or to run. The meeting took place on the great human ship. They called it the Remembrance. It had been the flagship of the first ones 4 billion years ago. It had been the last ship to survive the war against the Hollow. It had carried the final refugees to Earth, where they had devolved themselves and begun the long sleep. And it had waited, hidden in the depths of space, for the day when it would be needed again. Now it floated above Earth like a promise and a warning. Vor came aboard with a delegation of Concorde leaders. They walked through corridors that felt alive, past walls that seemed to breathe, into a chamber that was larger than most cities. In the center of the chamber, a circle of humans waited for them. Admiral Chen Wei, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Secretary General Maria Santos, and others, old and young, male and female, from every nation on Earth. They stood together, and there was something in their eyes that made the Concord delegates feel very small. "Thank you for coming," Santos said. "We know this is difficult for you, to learn that everything you believed about the galaxy was wrong, to discover that you are not the elders you thought you were." "Difficult is one word for it," said a delegate named Koros, a being of living crystal. "Terrifying is another." "We do not want you to be terrified," Santos said. "We want you to understand. What we are about to share with you will change everything, but it will also give you something you never had before." "What is that?" "The truth." Chen Wei stepped forward. In his hands he held a small device. It was simple in appearance, just a sphere of crystal that pulsed with inner light, but it contained 4 billion years of memory. "This is a record," he said, "a complete history of the first ones, who we were, what we built, why we chose to sleep, and what we were hiding from." He activated the device. The memories flooded into every mind in the room. The Concord delegates saw the first ones as they had been, not as gods or monsters, but as people. People who had come from a small world in a quiet part of the galaxy. People who had looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. People who had built ships and sailed into the darkness and found that they were alone. For millions of years, they were the only intelligent species in the galaxy. They searched and searched, hoping to find others like themselves. But the galaxy was empty, silent, dead. So they decided to change that. They seeded worlds with life. They guided evolution toward intelligence. They built the hyperspace lanes that made interstellar travel possible. They created the conditions for 1,000 civilizations to rise. And then they waited. They waited for their children to grow. They waited for the day when they would not be alone anymore. The Concord delegates wept. They saw themselves in those memories. They saw their own ancient ancestors as primitive creatures, struggling to survive on harsh worlds. And they saw the first ones watching over them, protecting them, hoping for them. They were not the parents of the galaxy. They were the children. And humanity, the first ones, had loved them, had sacrificed everything for them, had given up their power, their knowledge, their very memories, just so that their children could have a chance to grow. Then the delegates saw the hollow. It came from beyond the galaxy, beyond the universe perhaps, a thing of hunger and darkness that existed only to consume. It fed on consciousness, on thought, on the very essence of what made living beings alive. The first ones felt it coming. They prepared. They built weapons. They formed armies. They did everything they could think of to fight the enemy that was approaching. It was not enough. The hollow was not a species that could be defeated. It was more like a force of nature, like trying to fight gravity or time or entropy. Every weapon the first ones used made it stronger. Every victory they won taught it new ways to attack. The war lasted 1,000,000 years. In the end, the first ones made a terrible choice. They could not win. They could not run. The hollow would find them wherever they went. The only way to survive was to become invisible, to become so small and primitive that the hollow would not notice them. So they reset themselves. They devolved their bodies. They erased their memories. They reduced themselves to single-celled organisms and scattered across 1,000 worlds. And they slept. They slept for 4 billion years, waiting for the hollow to grow bored and move on. But before they slept, they did one final thing. They made sure their children would survive. They hid the hyperspace lanes. They concealed the evidence of advanced technology. They made the galaxy look empty and dead, just as it had been when they first found it. And they left guardians, keepers who would watch over the sleeping children, who would guide them if they ever faced the hollow again, who would help them remember when the time was right. The memories ended. The Concord delegates stood in silence. Many of them were crying. Others looked like they had been struck by lightning. The truth had changed everything they knew about themselves and their place in the universe. Koros, the crystal being, spoke first. His voice was thick with emotion. You sacrificed everything, he said. Your civilization, your memories, your very selves, all to protect us. Yes, Chen Wei said simply. Why? Why would you do that for species that did not even exist yet? Chen Wei smiled. It was a sad smile, full of memories that were not quite his own, but felt like they belonged to him anyway. Because that is what parents do, he said. They sacrifice for their children. They give up everything so that the next generation can have a chance. We knew we might never wake up. We knew our children might never know what we had done for them. But we did it anyway, because we loved you. We loved all of you, even the ones we would never meet. Ambassador Thesra stepped forward. She had not spoken since the memories began. Her silver skin was wet with tears, and her ancient eyes held something that looked like wonder. The hollow, she said. You said it is coming back. Yes. How do you know? Chen Wei turned to Dr. Tanaka. She activated a display that showed deep space, far beyond the edge of the galaxy. And there, in the darkness between galaxies, something was moving. It was hard to see. It looked like a patch of space that was somehow darker than the space around it. A shadow that moved against the background of distant stars. Our sensors detected it 3 days ago, Tanaka said. It is still far away. Millions of light years. But it is coming. Somehow it knows we are waking up. And it is coming to finish what it started. The Concord delegates looked at the display. They looked at the ancient darkness that was moving toward them. And they felt the same fear that the first ones had felt 4 billion years ago. Can it be stopped? Vor asked. No, Chen Wei said. Not destroyed. Not defeated. The first ones tried everything. Nothing worked. But it can be redirected. It can be led away. That is what we are preparing for. How? The first ones built something. A weapon of last resort. A beacon that would attract the hollow and lead it away from the galaxy. They never had a chance to use it. The war ended before they could finish building it. But now you remember how to build it. Yes, and we are building it. But it will require enormous power. More power than humanity alone possesses. We will need help. Chen Wei looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. Beings from 100 different species. Children of the first ones. Every one of them. We will need all of you, he said. Working together. Not as elders and children, but as family. As the family we always were. Even when we did not know it. Vor powered down his weapons. 10,000 ships lowered their shields. Across the Concord fleet, weapons went cold and targeting systems shut down. It was the largest military force assembled in a million years, and it was surrendering, not because it had been defeated, but because it had learned the truth. I have served the Concord for 30 million years, Vor said. I have fought wars and made peace and done things I am not proud of, but I have never felt what I feel now. What do you feel? Chen Wei asked. Gratitude, humility, hope. For the first time in my existence, I understand where I come from. I understand why I exist. And I understand what I must do. He knelt. The energy that formed his body bent and bowed before the humans standing before him. And around the fleet, on thousands of ships, crews from 100 different species did the same. We are your children, Vor said. We did not know it until today, but we know it now. And we will stand with you. Not because you demand it, but because it is right. Chen Wei walked forward and placed his hand on Vor's bowed head. The energy tingled against his palm, warm and alive. Rise, he said. We did not return to be worshipped. We returned to fight alongside you, to protect you as we always have. Get up, Admiral. There is work to do. Vor rose. His energy form seemed brighter somehow, more focused, more determined. What do you need? He asked. Everything you have. The beacon requires energy from every star in the galaxy. Every ship, every station, every power source. We must work together. All of us. Concord and humanity. Elders and children. Family. Then you will have it. I swear this on my existence. The Concord will stand with the first ones. Whatever comes, we will face it together. Word spread through the galaxy like fire. The first ones had returned. The builders of the hyperspace lanes. the seeders of life, the parents of every species in the Concord. They had been sleeping on Earth for 4 billion years, and now they were awake. And they were calling their children to war, not against each other, not against the conquered or the humans or any living thing, against something far worse, against the darkness that had nearly destroyed them once before, against the hollow. Ships began to move. Fleets that had been rivals for millions of years set aside their differences. Species that had not spoken in centuries opened communication channels. Resources that had been hoarded were shared. Knowledge that had been kept secret was given freely. The galaxy was uniting, not because it was forced to, not because it was threatened, but because it had finally learned the truth about itself. It was a family. It had always been a family, and families stood together when darkness came. On Earth, Chen Wei watched the galaxy come together. He felt the weight of 4 billion years pressing on his shoulders. He felt the responsibility of being the one who had to lead this fight. But he also felt hope. The first ones had given up everything to save their children. They had slept for 4 billion years, waiting for this moment. And now at last the moment had arrived. The hollow was coming, but this time it would find more than sleeping prey. It would find a galaxy united, a family ready to fight, children standing alongside parents for the first time in 4 billion years. It would find humanity, and humanity would remember who they truly were. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Every species, every world, every ship and station and outpost in the Milky Way worked together toward a single goal. Resources flowed along the hyperspace lanes like blood through veins. Engineers from 1,000 different cultures shared their knowledge. Scientists who had been rivals for millions of years collaborated on problems that had seemed impossible. And at the center of it all was Earth. The small blue planet that had once been dismissed as the cradle of a young species had become the heart of the greatest project in galactic history. Ships gathered in orbit by the thousands. Factories ran day and night. Energy collectors spread across the solar system, drinking in the light of the sun. They were building the beacon. Dr. Tanaka led the construction team. She had accessed the deepest layers of the memory libraries on Mars, learning secrets that the first ones had kept even from themselves. The beacon was not just a machine, it was a promise. A light in the darkness that would shine brighter than any star. A lure that the hollow would not be able to resist. "How does it work?" Admiral Vore asked during one of the many meetings. Tanaka pulled up a display showing the beacon's design. It was beautiful in its complexity, a sphere of pure energy contained within a lattice of exotic matter. "The hollow feeds on consciousness," she explained, "on thought, on awareness. That is why it attacked the first ones. They had created the brightest civilization in the galaxy's history. To the hollow, they were a feast waiting to be consumed. So the beacon simulates consciousness. Better than that, it creates a false consciousness, a light so bright that nothing else in the galaxy will compare. When we activate it, the hollow will be drawn to it like a moth to a flame. And then we send the beacon away, out of the galaxy, into the void between galaxies, and the hollow will follow. Forever? We hope so. The beacon is designed to run for billions of years, to lead the hollow on an endless chase through the empty darkness. It will never catch the beacon. It will never return to this galaxy. It will be gone." Vore's energy form flickered with something like hope. "The first ones created this design 4 billion years ago?" "Yes, but they never had a chance to build it. The war ended before they could gather the resources, before they could unite the galaxy. That is why they chose to sleep. They knew that one day when they woke up, their children would be there to help them finish what they started. And here we are. Yes, here we are." The awakening continued. Across the galaxy, other sleepers began to stir. Species that the Concord had thought were young, that they had treated with the same gentle condescension they had shown humanity. One by one, they began to remember. The Karathi, a species of gentle giants from the outer rim, discovered that they had once been the first one's greatest architects. They had designed the hyperspace lanes, carving paths through the fabric of space that made interstellar travel possible. The singing people of Kethros 4, supposedly extinct for millions of years, were found alive on a hidden world. They were another branch of the first ones, Another group of sleepers who had chosen to hide rather than face the hollow. The Vex Collective, the machine intelligence that had supposedly been destroyed by a software error 50 million years ago, turned out to be very much alive. They had been the first one's greatest scientists, and they had built the original design for the beacon. When humanity woke them, they immediately began improving the plans. Each awakening brought new knowledge, new memories, new pieces of the puzzle that the first ones had scattered across the galaxy 4 billion years ago. And each awakening made the Concord realize how wrong they had been. Ambassador Thesra visited Earth to witness the construction of the beacon. She walked through the shipyards and factories, watching beings from 100 species work side by side. Humans and Valorians and Karathi and Vex, children and parents, family. "We were so arrogant," she said to Secretary General Santos. "We called you children. We thought we were teaching you. All along, you were the teachers. You were the ones who made everything we have possible." Santos smiled gently. "You did not know. How could you? We did not know ourselves. We had forgotten just as completely as you had forgotten. But you forgive us? After all the condescension, all the superior attitudes, all the times we treated you like infants who needed guidance? There is nothing to forgive. You were doing your best with the knowledge you had. That is all any of us can do." Thesra was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her since she first learned the truth. "Do you regret it? The choice your ancestors made? Giving up everything? Sleeping for 4 billion years? Forgetting who you were?" Sanus thought about the question. She thought about the memories she had accessed in the libraries. The joy of the first ones at their height, the terror of the war against the Hollow, the grief of the final choice. "I think," she said slowly, "that my ancestors knew what they were doing. They knew the cost. They paid it willingly. Because they loved their children, because they wanted us to have a chance. How could I regret that? How could anyone regret an act of such complete and selfless love?" The Hollow arrived on a Tuesday. The deep space sensors had been tracking it for months, watching as it crossed the impossible distances between galaxies. It moved slowly at first, then faster still, as if it could sense the awakening, as if it knew that its ancient prey was stirring at last. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, watching the displays. Around him, the combined fleet of the galaxy waited in formation. Thousands of ships from hundreds of species, all facing the same direction, all watching the same patch of darkness. And then the darkness moved. It was hard to describe what the Hollow looked like. It was not a creature in any normal sense. It was more like an absence, a place where reality broke down, a wound in the fabric of the universe that hungered for everything it was not. It spread across the sky like spilled ink, blotting out the stars one by one. It was vast beyond imagining, larger than star systems, larger than nebulae, a darkness that could swallow galaxies whole. And it was hungry. Chen Wei felt it. Everyone in the fleet felt it. A pressure against their minds, a whisper that promised rest and peace and an end to all struggle. The Hollow did not fight with weapons. It fought with despair. It made its victims want to give up, to stop fighting, to let the darkness take them. The first ones had felt this despair 4 billion years ago. They had felt it and fought against it and eventually surrendered to it. Not because they were weak, but because they knew they could not win. But Chen Wei was not his ancestors. He was something new, something that had slept for 4 billion years and woken up with hope still burning in his heart, something that had been reborn through sacrifice and love and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win. He opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. "I know you feel it," he said. His voice was calm and steady. The despair, the hopelessness, the voice that tells you to give up. I feel it too. We all feel it. That is the Hollow's greatest weapon, not its hunger, not its darkness, its ability to make us believe we cannot win. He paused. On 1,000 ships, crews from 100 species listened. But we are not alone. We have never been alone. 4 billion years ago, our ancestors faced this enemy by themselves. They fought until they could not fight anymore. They gave up everything to give us a chance. And now we have that chance. Not as humans, not as Concord, as family. The despair pressed harder. The darkness spread wider. But on the bridge of the remembrance, Chen Wei smiled. The hollow feeds on consciousness. It feeds on awareness. It feeds on everything that makes us alive. But there is something it does not understand, something it has never understood. When we stand together, we are more than the sum of our parts. When we fight for each other, we are stronger than any hunger. When we love, we become a light that no darkness can extinguish. He turned to face the approaching shadow. Activate the beacon. Across the galaxy, power flowed. Every star, every reactor, every energy source in the Milky Way contributed to the beacon. The collected power of 100 billion suns focused on a single point in space near Earth. The lattice of exotic matter that contained the beacon's core began to glow. At first, it was just a spark, a tiny point of light in the darkness. But the spark grew. It became a flame. The flame became a fire. And the fire became something else entirely. A false consciousness was born, an artificial awareness so bright, so vast, so overwhelming that it outshone everything else in the galaxy. Every living mind, every thinking being, every flicker of awareness was nothing compared to the light of the beacon. To the hollow, it must have seemed like a feast beyond imagining, a meal that would satisfy its hunger for all eternity. The greatest prize it had ever encountered. The darkness hesitated. For the first time in billions of years, it stopped. It hung in space, vast and terrible, considering this new thing, this impossible light that burned brighter than any star. Then it turned, slowly at first, then faster. The hollow shifted its attention from the fleet, from the galaxy, from everything it had been approaching. It focused entirely on the beacon, and the beacon began to move. The plan was simple. The beacon would lead the hollow away from the galaxy, out into the void between galaxies, into the empty darkness where nothing lived and nothing grew. It would run forever, and the hollow would chase forever, and the galaxy would be safe. But simple plans often have complications. The beacon was fast, but the hollow was faster. The darkness surged forward, closing the gap between itself and the false light. The beacon increased its speed, drawing on more power from across the galaxy. But it was not enough. The hollow was too hungry, too desperate, too close. Dr. Tanaka watched the displays with growing horror. "It is catching up," she said. "We did not account for this. The hollow is adapting. It is learning how to move faster." "Can we boost the beacon's speed?" Chen Wei asked. "We are already at maximum power. Every energy source in the galaxy is connected. There is nothing left to give." Chen Wei closed his eyes. He reached deep into the memories that had been unlocked over the past year, searching for something, anything that might help, and he found it. A final memory, a secret that the first ones had kept even from themselves, a last resort that they had hoped would never be needed. "There is one more thing we can give," he said quietly. Tanaka looked at him. Her face was pale. "You cannot mean..." "The beacon feeds on consciousness. It needs awareness to burn. We have been giving it artificial awareness, created by machines. But that awareness is weak compared to the real thing." Chen Wei, no. If we connect living minds to the beacon, willingly, knowingly, we can make it burn brighter, bright enough to outrun the hollow forever. But the minds connected to the beacon, they would be gone. They would become part of it. They would never come back. Chen Wei nodded slowly. "I know." The call went out across the fleet. Chen Wei explained the situation. The beacon was not fast enough. The hollow was catching up. Without more power, the plan would fail and the galaxy would be consumed. He did not ask for volunteers. He did not demand sacrifice. He simply told the truth and waited. The responses came within seconds. First one ship, then 10, then 100, then 1,000. Beings from every species in the galaxy, offering to connect their minds to the beacon, offering to give up their existence so that others could live. "We are the children of the first ones," said a Karathi captain. 4 billion years ago, our parents gave up everything for us. How can we do any less? "I have lived for 30 million years," said Admiral Vore. "That is enough. Let me spend what remains of my existence protecting those who come after. I always wanted to be a star, said a young human pilot. Now I get my wish. The volunteers numbered in the millions. More than enough. More than Chen Wei had ever expected. He looked at the list of names. Each one a life. Each one a story. Each one a consciousness that would burn forever in the beacon's light. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you all. The connection was made. Millions of minds linked to the beacon's core. Their awareness flooded into the artificial consciousness, making it brighter, hotter, more real. The beacon was no longer a simulation. It was a collection of souls, a congregation of the willing, a light made of love and sacrifice and hope. The hollow felt the change. It surged forward even faster, desperate to consume this incredible prize. But the beacon was faster now, much faster. The gap between them began to widen. Across the galaxy, those who remained watched as the beacon climbed higher. Out of the galactic plane, away from the spinning arms of stars and planets, into the vast emptiness beyond. The hollow followed. It could not help itself. The light was too bright. The meal was too tempting. It abandoned the galaxy it had come to consume and chased the fleeing beacon into the void. Farther and farther they went, past the boundary of the galaxy, into the darkness between galaxies, into the cold, empty space where nothing had ever lived and nothing ever would. And still the beacon burned. And still the hollow followed. Chen Wei stood at the observation window of the remembrance, watching the stars. It was over. The hollow was gone, chasing a light that would run forever. The galaxy was safe. The children of the first ones would live. But the cost had been high. Millions of minds now burned in the beacon's core. Millions of beings who had chosen to sacrifice themselves for others. They were not dead exactly. They still existed. They still thought and felt and remembered. But they would never return to the lives they had known. Thesra stood beside him. Her silver skin was dimmed with grief. Was it worth it? She asked. Chen Wei considered the question. He thought about the first ones, who had given up everything 4 billion years ago. He thought about the volunteers, who had given up everything today. He thought about the children who would never know the names of those who had died for them. Ask me in 1,000 years, he said. Ask me when the galaxy has had time to heal, when new species have arisen to take the place of those we lost, when children look up at the stars and dream of exploration and discovery and hope. And what will you say then? I will say that sacrifice is never wasted, that love is never lost, that the light we create does not end when we do. It lives on in those we leave behind, in the worlds we protect, in the future we make possible. He turned to face her. The first ones understood this. They gave up everything, their civilization, their memories, their very selves, because they loved us, their children, their family. And we are here today because of that love, because of that sacrifice. How could I say it was not worth it? How could anyone? The galaxy rebuilt. It took years, decades, centuries, but slowly the wounds healed. The species that had lost millions of their best and brightest learned to continue without them. The hyperspace lanes hummed with traffic again. New cities rose on 1,000 worlds, and humanity took its place among the stars. Not as children learning to walk, not as juniors in a cosmic hierarchy, but as what they had always been, the first ones, the builders, the parents of the galaxy. They did not demand worship. They did not claim special privileges. They simply did what they had always done, even when they had forgotten who they were. They explored, they created, they loved, and they remembered. Every year on the anniversary of the Hollow's departure, the galaxy held a day of remembrance. Beings from every species gathered to honor those who had sacrificed themselves. They spoke the names of the fallen. They told the stories of their courage. They made sure that no one forgot. Chen Wei lived to see many of these days. The memories of the first ones had changed him, extended his life in ways that human science could not explain. He grew old slowly, watching generations rise and fall, watching the galaxy become what his ancestors had always hoped it would be. A family. He died peacefully on a quiet day, surrounded by those who loved him. His last words were spoken to his great-great-granddaughter, a young woman who had just been accepted into the Galactic Exploration Corps. Remember who you are, he told her. Not just human, not just a first one. Remember that you are part of something larger, a story that began billions of years ago and will continue for billions of years more. You are the light that your ancestors died to protect. Never let that light go out. She promised, she kept her promise, and the light burned on. Far beyond the edge of the galaxy, in the cold darkness between galaxies, the beacon still ran. Millions of minds joined together, burned with a light that would never fade. They no longer remembered their individual names or faces or lives. They had become something else, something greater, a constellation of consciousness that had transcended the limitations of flesh and blood. They were not sad. They were not lonely. They were together. They were loved. They were doing what they had always wanted to do, protecting those who could not protect themselves. Sometimes, in the rare moments when the beacon passed near a distant galaxy, other beings would detect its light. They would wonder what it was. This impossible brightness sailing through the void, this star that moved, this light that seemed almost alive. They never knew the truth. They never knew that the light was made of sacrifice, that it was the gift of beings who had loved their children so much that they had become stars to save them. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the best gifts are the ones that are given freely, without expectation of thanks or recognition. Maybe the greatest love is the love that asks for nothing in return. The first ones had understood this. They had given up everything, twice, to protect a galaxy that would never fully understand what they had done. And in the end, their children had proven worthy of that sacrifice. The universe had seen humanity as young. They had thought them children, stumbling through their first steps in an ancient cosmos. They were wrong. Humanity was never young. They had simply chosen to forget, to sleep, to give everything so that others could have a chance to grow. And now at last the universe knew the truth. The elders had returned, and they had brought light to the darkness, forever.